The salt air hit Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison's face as he stood on the deck of the USS Bogue, staring at the gray Atlantic horizon. It was March 1943, and the war was bleeding America dry. German U-boats prowled these waters like sharks, sinking supply ships faster than the shipyards in Brooklyn could replace them. Every week brought news of another convoy torn apart, another 100 men lost to the cold depths. Jack was 32 years old, broad-shouldered with sun-weathered skin and eyes that had seen too much death in too little time. He came from a small fishing town in Maine called Port Clyde, where his father had taught him to read the ocean before he could read a book. His hands were calloused from years working the nets before Pearl Harbor changed everything. Now those same hands gripped the controls of a Grumman TBF Avenger, hunting the hunters. But Jack had a problem that made him an outcast among his fellow pilots. While other aviators flew high and fast, following standard Navy doctrine, Jack flew low and slow, dangerously low. His technique came from an unlikely source. His days as a flight instructor back in Pensacola, Florida, where he taught nervous cadets in gentle trainer planes. He learned that sometimes slower meant deadlier, that patience beat speed when you were hunting something that could hide. The other pilots called it suicide. His commanding officer, Captain Richard Thornton, a stiff Virginia gentleman with a career built on protocol, called it insubordination. Jack called it effective. 3 days ago, Thornton had grounded him. The order came down after Jack broke formation during a patrol, dropping to barely 50 feet above the waves to investigate what turned out to be a false contact. The other pilots reported him. Thornton was furious, his face turning the color of a Maryland crab as he slammed his fist on the desk in his quarters. "You fly like you are still teaching farm boys and trainers, Morrison. This is combat. You follow orders or you sit out this war in a supply depot in Kansas." Jack had said nothing. He knew arguing with Thornton was like arguing with a brick wall. The captain was Old Navy, a man who believed the manual was written in stone and delivered by God himself. Now Jack stood on deck, watching other pilots prepare for morning patrol while his Avenger sat chained and silent. His radio man, Danny Costa, a wiry kid from the Bronx with quick hands and a quicker mouth, approached with 2 cups of terrible Navy coffee. "They are saying the convoy 20 miles north got hit again last night," Danny said, his Brooklyn accent thick as molasses. 3 freighters gone. The Krauts are having a field day out here." Jack took the coffee, its bitter warmth doing nothing to ease the frustration burning in his chest. He knew his methods worked. In his last 4 sorties before being grounded, he had forced 2 U-boats to crash dive, disrupting their attacks. One of those submarines had been damaged badly enough that it limped back to France and never returned. But Thornton did not care about results. He cared about rules. The morning briefing happened without Jack. He watched from a distance as pilots gathered around Thornton on the flight deck, the captain pointing at maps and giving coordinates. Standard search patterns, high-altitude sweeps, everything by the book. Everything the Germans had learned to anticipate and avoid. By noon, the patrol returned with nothing. No contacts, no kills, just wasted fuel and wasted time while merchant sailors died. Jack spent the afternoon in the hangar, helping the mechanic service his Avenger even though he was not allowed to fly it. The chief mechanic, a gray-haired Texan named Earl who had been fixing planes since the Great War, worked beside him in comfortable silence. Earl understood. He had seen enough combat to know that sometimes the rules got men killed. That evening, as the sun painted the ocean orange and red, word came through the radio room. Another convoy under attack. This time it was personal. The SS Portland Liberty, a merchant ship out of Jack's hometown carrying medical supplies and ammunition, was taking torpedo hits. The distress calls were frantic. Men were dying in the water. Jack found Captain Thornton on the bridge, listening to the radio chatter with a stone face. "Permission to fly, sir. I can be airborne in 10 minutes. Thornton did not even look at him. "You are grounded, Lieutenant Commander." "That has not changed. Men from my town are on that ship," Jack said, his voice steady but his hands clenched into fists. "Then they will die following proper procedure, just like everyone else in this war," Thornton replied coldly. "Now get off my bridge." Jack left, But he did not go to his quarters. He went to the flight deck, where his Avenger waited in the darkness. Danny was already there, having heard the radio traffic. The young radio man looked at Jack with a question in his eyes that did not need words. Jack made a decision that would either save hundreds of lives or end his career in disgrace. Maybe both. Jack checked his watch. 2,300 hours. Most of the crew was asleep except for the night watch. The deck officer was making rounds on the port side. He had maybe 5 minutes. Danny, if you come with me on this, your career is over too. You understand that? The kid from the Bronx grinned, though his hands trembled slightly as he climbed into the aircraft. My old man always said I was too stupid to know when to quit. Let's go save some lives, sir. They worked fast. Earl appeared from the shadows, having anticipated exactly what Jack planned to do. The old mechanic said nothing, just helped remove the chains and chocks. Within 4 minutes, the Avenger's engine coughed to life, its propeller cutting through the salt air. Jack did not wait for clearance. He could not. By the time the tower realized what was happening, he was already accelerating down the deck, the carrier's lights falling away behind him as he climbed into the black sky. The radio exploded with angry voices. Morrison, you are ordered to return immediately. This is Captain Thornton. You are committing a court-martial offense. Return to the ship now. Jack switched off the radio. He knew the coordinates of the convoy from the distress calls. He pushed the throttle forward and dropped low, using the technique that had gotten him grounded in the first place. At 200 feet above the waves, he was invisible to German radar. The darkness was complete, broken only by the faint glow of his instruments. Danny's voice crackled through the intercom. Sir, we just threw away everything. Our careers, our reputations, maybe our freedom. This better work. It will work, Jack replied, though doubt gnawed at his gut. It has to. 15 miles out, they saw it. The horizon lit up with orange fire as another ship took a torpedo. Even from this distance, Jack could hear the explosions carrying across the water. The Portland Liberty was listing badly, men jumping into the freezing Atlantic as flames consumed the deck. And somewhere below that dark water, a U-boat was reloading its torpedoes, preparing to finish the job. Jack dropped even lower, his wheels nearly skimming the wavetops. This was the moment Thornton called reckless. This was the moment other pilots said would get him killed. But Jack had learned something in those slow trainer planes back in Florida. When you fly low enough, slow enough, patient enough, you do not hunt submarines. You become part of the ocean itself. You disappear into the background noise of waves and wind. And the enemy never sees you coming until it is too late. Through the darkness ahead, Danny spotted it. Periscope wake, 11 o'clock. Moving fast. Jack armed his depth charges and began his approach. Everything he had trained for, everything he believed in, came down to the next 60 seconds. Jack banked hard left, lining up his approach on the periscope wake, cutting through the black water. The U-boat commander had no idea death was coming from above. At this altitude, in this darkness, Jack's Avenger was a ghost. Steady, Danny whispered through the intercom, his Brooklyn accent tight with tension. Steady. Jack held his breath. His father's voice echoed in his memory from those early mornings on the fishing boats in Maine. Patience, boy. The ocean rewards patience, not panic. The periscope wake grew closer. 200 yards. 150. Now, Jack released the depth charges in a perfect pattern, for explosions that turned the night ocean into a cauldron of white foam and fire. The U-boat tried to dive, but it was too late. The charges detonated at precisely the right depth, and through the flames Jack saw the submarine's hull breach the surface, twisted metal screaming as water rushed into the ruptured pressure chambers. Men began spilling from the conning tower, German sailors abandoning ship as their U-boat died beneath them. Jack circled once, marking the position for the destroyer escorts racing toward the scene. His radio crackled back to life. Unidentified aircraft, this is destroyer USS Benson. Confirm your identity and that kill. Jack keyed his microphone. This is Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison, USS Bogue. 1 U-boat destroyed. Convoy should be clear to proceed. There was a pause, Then a different voice came through, rough with emotion. "Morrison, this is Captain Peters of the Portland Liberty. You just saved 230 men, including my entire crew from Port Clyde. We owe you our lives." Jack felt something break inside his chest, relief flooding through him like a wave. "Just doing my job, Captain." But the relief was short-lived. Thornton's voice cut through the frequency, cold as Arctic ice. "Morrison, return to the Bogue immediately. You are under arrest." The flight back felt longer than the mission itself. Danny sat silent in the rear seat, both of them knowing what waited on that carrier deck. Court-martial, disgrace, possibly prison. Jack had disobeyed direct orders, stolen a military aircraft, and abandoned his post. No amount of dead U-boats would erase that. If you were sitting there wondering what happens next, hoping Jack finds a way through this impossible situation, take a moment and hit that subscribe button. Because what comes next is going to change everything, not just for Jack Morrison, but for the entire Battle of the Atlantic. When Jack landed on the Bogue's deck 40 minutes later, 6 Marines were waiting with rifles. Captain Thornton stood behind them, his face carved from stone. Jack climbed down from his Avenger, exhausted, soaked in sweat, but standing tall. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, you are hereby relieved of duty and confined to quarters pending court-martial proceedings. Do you have anything to say?" Jack met his eyes. "Yes, sir. I would do it again." They locked Jack in a small cabin below deck, posting a Marine guard outside his door. Danny was confined separately. For 3 days, Jack sat alone, listening to the sounds of the carrier continuing its mission without him. He could hear planes launching, returning, the constant rhythm of war that did not stop for one man's fate. On the 4th morning, the door opened, but it was not Thornton. It was Admiral Chester Nimitz himself, flanked by 2 officers Jack did not recognize. The Admiral was a lean man with piercing eyes and a reputation for being ruthless with incompetence but fair with courage. "Morrison," the Admiral said, sitting down across from him, "you have put me in a difficult position. You disobeyed orders, stole an aircraft, and showed complete contempt for the chain of command." "Yes, sir," Jack replied. "I did." Nimitz pulled out a folder. "But you also sank a U-boat that had already killed 17 Allied ships in the past month. The German commander you killed was Hans Kruger, one of their top aces. Naval intelligence has been hunting him for 8 months." The Admiral leaned forward. "Captain Thornton wants you court-martialed and dishonorably discharged. But I have been reading reports about your methods. This low-altitude, slow-approach technique. Where did you learn it?" "Flight instruction, sir. Pensacola. Training cadets in basic aircraft taught me that sometimes slower and lower beats faster and higher. Submarines cannot hear you coming when you are part of the wave noise." Nimitz nodded slowly. "Show me. Prove to me this is not just lucky recklessness. You have 1 week. I am assigning you 4 aircraft and full operational authority. If you can replicate your success, I will personally clear your record. If you fail, Thornton gets his court-martial." Jack felt his heart hammer against his ribs. 1 week. For planes. Everything on the line. The Admiral stood. "One more thing, Morrison. I am pulling Thornton off operational command for this mission. You report directly to me now. Do not make me regret this." Within hours, Jack was back in the air with Danny and 3 other crews who volunteered to fly his way. He trained them in the technique, teaching them to read the ocean the way his father had taught him, to trust their instincts over their instruments, to become patient hunters instead of aggressive attackers. The results were immediate and devastating. On day 2, they sank 2 U-boats attacking a convoy near the Azores. On day 4, another submarine went down off Cape Hatteras. On day 6, Jack personally destroyed 2 more U-boats in a single sortie, a feat no other pilot had accomplished in the entire Atlantic theater. 5 U-boats in 1 week. The German wolf packs that had terrorized the Atlantic for years suddenly found themselves being hunted by an enemy they could not detect until it was too late. The 7th day arrived with gray skies and choppy seas. Jack stood on the Bogue's deck as Admiral Nimitz reviewed the mission reports. A stack of confirmed kill documents spread across the briefing table. 5 U-boats destroyed. 3 more damaged and forced to retreat. 11 convoys saved. over 1,000 lives preserved. Captain Thornton stood in the corner, his face unreadable. He had not spoken to Jack since the Admiral's intervention, but his silence said everything. The old captain's world of rigid protocols had been challenged, and reality had won. Nimitz looked up from the reports, his expression serious. "Morrison, what you have accomplished this week will be studied at Annapolis for generations. You have proven that innovation matters more than tradition when lives are at stake." The Admiral turned to Thornton. "Captain, I am hereby ordering the implementation of the Morrison Protocol across all Atlantic carrier groups. Low-altitude anti-submarine tactics will become standard training effective immediately." Thornton's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." Nimitz faced Jack again. "Your court-martial is dismissed. Furthermore, you are promoted to commander and assigned as chief anti-submarine warfare instructor for the Atlantic Fleet. You will train every pilot who hunts U-boats, and you will do it your way." Jack felt the weight of 3 months lift from his shoulders. He had risked everything, his career, his freedom, his life, and somehow he had won. But it was not really about winning. It was about those sailors in the water, those convoys that made it home, those families who would not receive telegrams saying their sons were lost at sea. "Thank you, sir." After the briefing, Thornton approached him privately. The Virginia gentleman looked older somehow, worn down by a war that moved faster than his procedures could adapt. "Morrison, I owe you an apology. I was wrong. I let protocol blind me to effectiveness. Men died because I could not see past the manual." Jack extended his hand. "We are all learning as we go, Captain. This war does not give us time to be perfect." Thornton shook it firmly. "Teach them well, Commander. Make sure my mistake does not get repeated." That evening, Jack stood on deck with Danny, watching the sun set over an ocean that felt a little less dangerous than it had a week ago. The kid from the Bronx was grinning, a telegram from his mother clutched in his hand, saying she had heard about their heroics on the radio news. "We really did it, sir. 5 U-boats in 1 week. They are calling you the Atlantic Ghost." Jack smiled, thinking of his father back in Port Clyde, probably listening to the same news broadcast while mending his fishing nets. The old man would be proud, not because his son had become famous, but because he had stayed true to what he had been taught. Patience, instinct, respect for the ocean. The war was far from over, but tonight, the Atlantic belonged to them. December 1945. Port Clyde, Maine. Jack Morrison stood on the same dock where his father had taught him to fish 25 years ago. The war was over. Germany had surrendered. Japan had fallen. The Atlantic Ocean, once a graveyard for thousands of Allied sailors, was finally at peace. He was 34 now, with gray threading through his dark hair, and a Navy Cross pinned inside a box in his duffel bag. He had trained over 300 pilots in his techniques during the remaining war years. Together, they had sunk 47 U-boats and saved countless convoys. The Morrison Protocol had become standard doctrine, taught at every naval aviation school in America. Danny Costa had survived the war too, earning his own promotion and returning to the Bronx to marry his childhood sweetheart. They wrote letters every month. Still bonded by that night, they had stolen an Avenger and changed the course of history. Earl, the old Texas mechanic, had retired with full honors. Captain Thornton had written Jack a personal letter 6 months before the war ended, admitting that learning to adapt had made him a better officer. He died 3 weeks after VE Day, heart attack on the bridge of his ship. He went out serving exactly how he would have wanted. Jack's father appeared at the end of the dock, older and grayer but still strong, still carrying that same weathered face that had read oceans for 50 years. They embraced without words, the kind of hug that said everything language could not. "You did good, son. Real good." "I learned from the best," Jack replied. They walked back toward town together, past the memorial that now bore the names of Port Clyde men who had not come home. 17 names. 17 fewer than there would have been if that convoy had gone down. Jack touched the cold stone, saying a silent prayer for the ones who were not as lucky. That evening, over his mother's clam chowder and his father's stories, Jack felt something he had not felt in 3 years. Peace. Real peace. Not just the absence of war, but the presence of purpose fulfilled. He had trusted his instincts when the world told him to follow the rules. He had risked everything to save lives. And it had mattered. The trainer-plane tactics that got him grounded had ended up saving thousands. Sometimes the manual is wrong. Sometimes you have to fly your own way. If you made it this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking this journey with Commander Jack Morrison. His story reminds us that courage is not about following orders blindly, but about standing up for what you know is right, even when everyone doubts you. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Drop a comment telling me what kind of story you want to hear next, maybe another war hero, or a different kind of underdog triumph. And please, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next incredible true story of courage, sacrifice, and redemption. Until next time, keep fighting for what matters.